as I've been working my way through the Alfred Hitchcock
Blu-ray
collection, I did happen to watch Rope before I saw this movie. That was
another
a
movie
couple
from
earlier
the 50s,
on
right?
ones. And what's really great about Rope is that, being a movie, they actually talk about murder, they talk about villains, and then when they mention who would make a great, excellent villain, one of the characters says, I think James Mason would make a great villain. And it was almost exactly 11 years to the day later that Hitchcock came through on that promise and gave us a great James Mason villain.
Somebody on Twitter, it's a good call, right? Because it's in the movie, it's documented. Somebody on Twitter said, had a question, what's the best anybody's ever looked on film? And conversations was like Sybil Shepherd from Last Picture Show. I can't argue with that. But the correct answer is Cary Grant in North by Northwest.
I would also say Eva Marie Saint in North by Northwest. I would say James Mason, Martin Landau. I think all of these are kind of at the peak of themselves.
Yeah, are the best looking ever on film. So we're going to talk about Alfred Hitchcock's movie that was supposed to end of all Hitchcock films, North by Northwest.
Welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, George Kaplan, a.k.a. Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
And I'm Rod. All right, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for finding us. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continued support of the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. We do have a Patreon. Check that out. And today we're going to talk about Hitchcock's last film of the 50s, where he really dominated the 50s. It's the movie that was supposed to end all Hitchcock movies, North by Northwest.
All right, so Roger Thornhill is a New York City ad executive who is living a rather uneventful life. That is, until a group of goons mistake him for a man named George Kaplan and kidnap him. Now Thornhill's been framed for crimes he didn't commit and must evade the foreign spies chasing him and the government agents trying to catch him as he tries to discover who is George Kaplan.
Okay, so to talk about this is Kyle's first time ever seeing this film.
First and second time.
First and second. He actually, for the first time watching, then go back and watch it again. So I always ask people the first time, what house would you love to live in? Lester Townsend's house? Or Van Damme's house in South Dakota?
Well, having been to Mount Rushmore a couple of times, it's kind of off the beaten path. So I'd probably not take that home.
The Frank
I feel like the taxes are probably high. You got that. I'm kind of clumsy sometimes. I've been known to fall down a staircase.
I love that house.
I like the house, but like just the location doesn't work for me. People constantly watching you from
it's probably a 2-hour drive to get groceries.
Yeah, I just I like being close to town.
So this is immediately after Vertigo, and when something doesn't work and people kind of criticize and you consider almost like a flop, what you do the complete opposite. You find an action pace intense. This is definitely different from Vertigo. Immediately, even though this is the film after Vertigo, he didn't know if he was going to make movies after Vertigo ever again. He was so bitter about it, so he was just like, I'm going to go out with a bang and put everything, including the kitchen sink, into this production of North by Northwest.
When you told me that this was going to kind of be his, final Hitchcock action film, if you will, his thriller to end all of his thrillers. What's the quote from Cary Grant, A Class Apart, is quoted as the Hitchcock picture to end all Hitchcock pictures. When you told me that, my mind immediately went to Roland Emmerich's 2012. Because when he was going to quit doing disaster movies, he said, I'm going to do the biggest disaster in the world, a completely ludicrous end-of-the-world movie to end all end-of-the-world movies. And you know what? The comparison's kind of fair in terms of how they're executed. Of course, quality aside.
Yeah, quality.
North by Northwest is a fantastic action picture, but it is kind of that, like, we are going to do every action scene you can possibly think of. I mean, there was even talk while coming up with the story of having that, like, the villains somehow engineer a tornado to attack him.
Yes.
That ended up being the biplane instead, because they couldn't figure out a logical way to make a tornado attack
Right,
someone.
it was supposed to be the famous scene of the airplane attacking.
Yep.
Yeah.
But when Cary Grant was reading the script, he actually went to Alfred Hitchcock and was like, this is not going to work. This is completely ludicrous. He goes, I'm halfway through the script and I don't know what's going on. And that's what Hitchcock wanted.
Right.
And it's a tough thing to do to make people think that, yeah.
Because I love Hitchcock films. Story is silly. That's not that's just a vessel for what he wants to do.
Yeah, describing the story of this, if you didn't know about the movie and I described it to you, you would think it was a B horror or B action film. You think it was like a Chuck Norris movie from the late 80s or something like that, something that just oozes stupidity. But again, it always comes down to not the story you're telling, but how you tell it. and Hitchcock finds a way to cleverly make the film as believable as it needs to be, while still kind of falling into a ludicrous element.
So what happened was he attached Ernest Lehman to write the script. They were originally supposed to do another movie, but it got disbanded. And so Ernest Lehman's like, what are we going to do? And then Alfred's is like, we're going to do a completely new original story. He goes, well, movie production says we should do X, Y, and Z. He's like, we're not going to tell them. We're just going to go as along. And Hitchcock always wanted to do something about a journey kind of a movie of somebody going from point A to point B. And he always was fascinated about Mount Rushmore. He likes it's always about a location first with him.
That reminds me of like Saboteur with like on the Statue of Liberty kind of thing.
Yeah. So it's always location first, and then we get to figure out the story. And then I'm sure the task of to Ernest Lehman, I want from New York City to South Dakota. Figure that out.
Yeah. And what's captivating about him is that you expect someone like Alfred Hitchcock to be, because he works in the realm of like thrillers, horror, like that kind of intensity, you expect him to be maybe a little bit intense himself. But what I find so funny is the stories you read about him, like he didn't want to hurt Jimmy Stewart's feelings because he didn't want to work with Jimmy Stewart again after Vertigo. He felt Stewart couldn't bring in an audience anymore because he was getting up there in age, which is funny because then he cast Cary Grant. But
Cary Grant with a permanent suntan in this movie.
Yeah, he wanted, but the thing is, he described this movie as he was working on it, Vertigo, with Stewart, and Stewart got the idea that he was going to be cast from hearing Hitchcock talk about it. So Hitchcock waited just until after Jimmy Stewart had already gotten the call to work on Anatomy of a Murder, just so he could contact him, give him the role, and then be like, "Oh, I'm working on this other movie. That's all right. I'll find someone else." He didn't want to hurt his feelings, so he went a roundabout way because he really wanted Cary Grant.
Took the scenic route of just telling him,
you know. But again, we always assume that he's going to be this intense guy, but he's just one of the kindest, gentlest souls when it came to like, well, I don't want to hurt Jimmy Stewart's feelings.
So there's an element, a lot of comedy. Dialogue is kind of sometimes funny.
Oh yeah, so it's goofy comedy.
Why are you wearing? What's wrong with your eyes? Sensitive to questions. I love that.
He's got some of the cleverest dialogue I think I've ever heard.
Even the dialogue of him talking to Eva Marie saying, you know, how does a girl like you get to be a girl like you? Which is you don't say that in the real world. It doesn't really work, but yeah.
Most of the dialogue he has with Eva Marie Saint, I was like the whole time. And again, this is a year before Psycho, which was a movie that was so risque for a woman wearing lingerie,
this is
so
totally
risque for like flushing a toilet, even though there's no poop in the toilet, we're just flushing it.
Because he overdubbed.
And this is like the horniest movie I've ever seen from the 50s. It literally has like no sex the entire time, but hints at sex the whole time, and then the final shot is literally a train going into a tunnel.
I know.
And you're like,
the ending's
I
great.
get it, man.
Yeah. You're gonna tell Cary Grant you're gonna sleep on the floor? Yeah, right. You're just telling the audience what really happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, they dubbed that. If you didn't catch Eva Marie Saint, you know, you haven't eaten yet, but I have, and I never discussed sex on an empty stomach. They took the word sex out and just put love. So if you watch it, it's dubbed over.
Yep.
There's a lot of little misnomers. I just love that when the cops get Cary Grant and they turn, and actually Cary Grant does this to the cop, like, we're turning in the movie.
Oh, yeah.
So, he bumps the cop so they both...
Yeah. There's a lot of weird moments that work because you're not focused on them the first time you watch them. And remember, this is also a time when we didn't have re-releases that often. We didn't have movies on TV or home video, so, like, a mistake was kind of less.
Yeah, the little boy in the...
Yeah. But yeah, the little boy in that is one of the most notorious moments of breaking an extra. There's also when he's going into the UN. Apparently they couldn't get access to film at the actual United Nations.
No.
So they built a set for the inside stuff, but Hitchcock wanted to get the outside stuff too. So he installed a hidden camera and had Cary Grant walk
in a
up the
moving
steps.
van with a VistaVision. It was still VistaVision.
Yeah.
So it's that awkward.
So
big
he has
camera.
a hidden camera. Cary Grant walks up to the United Nations, but they didn't tell anyone they were filming a scene there. So there's actually a moment where a guy does a double take, and he's like, "Where's Cary Grant?" Like,
yeah, if you watch it again, like, because they paid for a taxi to take Cary Grant to the UN.
Yep.
In the suit, and then he goes up to the steps, and you can see the
someone
guy
stops and looks at.
That's what?
Yeah.
But
that's
again,
it didn't matter because the movie was, it's a small moment in an otherwise movie you probably may never see again because we didn't have the home video releases we have now.
Yeah. So then he does matte formatting of just him going in the entrance, and then he likes to build interior sets.
Yeah.
Doesn't like to work exterior. Mm-hmm. So, all the UN interior, that's all built sets.
Yeah, because they couldn't get access to it. And he was incredibly upset about that, apparently, that he just thought, like, anyone could
I'm
film in
Alfred
the
Hitchcock.
United
I don't want to make
Nations.
a movie, right? And then no. But there was all built-in interior. I do like the exterior because then the bad guy chasing him, they had to just wait for the bad guy at the taxi, so they shot that too of him going. But then they did another. It's for completely fake of the shot of right at the car and then the bad guy coming out. So there's a lot of other just not shooting that, but they did other scenes.
Yep.
When the bad guys nab Cary Grant, and there's a scene of him going after the door, but that's clearly a door cut out.
Yep.
And him going after the door, right?
Yeah, all these moments you only notice them the second time you watch. I didn't notice most of them the first time, but then I'd done a little bit of reading up on the film, just kind of taking some notes and kind of looking at some background stuff.
But they
as I
just
like
shoot
to
at
do.
the set station.
Yeah, and then you
Set to
notice it
station.
all over again when you're watching the second time.
But I love the interrogation scene with James Mason. James Mason has one of the best introductions ever on film.
Yep.
It's very subtle, but it's very menacing.
Yep.
And then he lights the atmosphere by himself. And, of course, you get the very Alfred Hitchcockian of shot overhead, or the overhead shot. He had to get that in. Mm-hmm. But that scene in the study is one of the best edited, cropped scenes you'll ever see.
Yep.
Camera's perfectly placed, pacing's right. Even the girl, guests are here. He shoots at low, looking up like where they would see her. And she's interrupting things to a point where we're having a good scene here. You're interrupting things.
Not only that, but it's a scene where Hitchcock's not afraid to get you pissed off. Because both times I watched it, I was angry watching that scene. Because, for the love of God, I know he has no ability to convince them that he's not George Kaplan. He has no proof that he's not George Kaplan. I mean, he's got his ID, but that doesn't prove anything, really.
I just love that. That's not going to lead to a happy conclusion.
Yeah, the thing is, I understand Thornhill's anger and frustration in that scene because there's no way he can actually convince them that he's not the man they're looking for.
No, but it's a great set. I love that. I love to be in that room. Because he doesn't
even know why they confused him. We as viewers understand it because he called over the waiter, the busboy, yeah. And they assumed that was because the busboy was looking for him. Like there was that moment of confusion, but neither one of our characters knows that that's the reason they think it's him. Mm-hmm. And so he has no way of convincing them otherwise. And what's so infuriating to me is I think this works better than Vertigo at subverting the I don't know what's happening moment. When they go back to the house the next morning, you're like, no, wait, how? Both Vertigo and this film have that I don't understand.
Almost like a horror movie. I swear to God, there was a monster here.
Boy,
there's no evidence. Yeah.
They both have it. They both do it very well. I think this film does it a little bit better than Vertigo because of its semi-lunacy. Because they're kind of playing with unreality a lot more. Yes. Whereas Vertigo takes itself a bit more seriously. So
yeah, and there's a little bit. Cary Grant, very familiar, not so much a comedian actor, but he's very good at comedy. He does it very well in this. He plays a great drunk driving. Yeah. Just do your drunk faces as you're driving.
Well,
yeah. And then he gets nabbed by the police.
It goes back to the silly thing of they're trying to get him to just kill himself on the road as a drunk driver. That's one of the best action scenes in any movie. One of the best car scenes.
It's funny, but it's also intense because he looks down like, oh.
I think I'm not advocate. I think every single person, whether you've had one beer or six, one beer person, if you're driving home, you're still under the legal limit. Most of the time, you're still feeling good about yourself. But I think every person behind the wheel of a vehicle, even with one beverage inside them, knows that kind of concern that you get when you start, when you're kind of surrounded. Don't drink and drive, people. But I'm saying when you have one and go home from the bar, you still feel that kind of nervousness about driving capably, making sure that you're safe, doing the right thing. Drunk. He wakes up in a car and he's hammered drunk and he doesn't know what's going on. I don't know that I could get out of that scene.
But then I love him when he gets nabbed. The whole at the police station at Glen Clove is one of the best comedy bits of all time. And it's not supposed to be for a comedy movie, but it's still hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody called the police, and he looks right at the cop. But the funniest thing, if you don't go back, the cops at Glencoe, they have holsters for their pencils. I get a chuckle out of it. If you notice, they got holsters for their pencils.
Maybe wherever they were filming, they didn't have weapons permits.
Even
or
Amy
something.
Klinger, which Cary Grant, I don't believe that name either. Yeah. Which is a great comedy. It's a comedy bit. I love that. Yeah.
That's always the idea, though, that you'll derive comedy from something that you've I don't know if I would have found the comedy watching this film for the first time when it was released. I only found it because you can kind of embrace that Hitchcockian style of it's almost like how Cronenberg says he makes comedies. Hitchcock probably said he made comedies, but like you had to really derive it from being okay with the thrill part too. You know,
Especially when he comes out through that lady's window. Stop!
Yeah.
And then she puts her glasses on and so you can scare her. And then he's like,
Yeah, like there's moments of that where it's like that was intentional comedy, but then there's that subtle comedy that you laugh at only because you know how the film ends at least, and you're like, I'm a little bit more relaxed. Like I laughed more the second time because I wasn't as invested in figuring out how the pieces worked.
So the very famous scene in the movie, which you probably see on the cover, is the plane chase shot in Cary Grant. Now that's all shot exterior. They found a location, but also there's some inside studio shots of him falling down, and then you have the little pockets. That's definitely inside where they have the rear projection. But a lot of it's exterior. They have obviously a very model set.
Yep.
That looks very model set. Maybe you should have cut a little bit earlier, but you can see it's a very much models on fire.
I'm more forgiving in the 50s. I don't know why, but like it fits in with the kind of style of the movie making. You know,
it does kind of look cute.
Yeah.
And my dad's like, "Well, who's flying the plane? What happened to that guy?" And my answer is always like Alfred Hitchcock. Who the hell cares?
Well, that guy, the guy flying the plane, he eventually suffered from having gas.
Initially, he's supposed to be one of the guys that nabbed him in the beginning. The guy with the hat was supposed to be him because you never see him again in the movie.
Oh, okay.
He's never part of the Mount Rushmore things, but like Alfred Hitchcock, who the hell cares?
Yeah, it's not really important. It's only important, and the reason why I was telling you the reason I saw it a second time is I enjoyed the mystery. I enjoyed the thrill ride. Yeah. But when certain things, we're going to get into some spoilers. Just it's streaming on HBO. Go check it out. When we find out that Eva Marie Saint's character is, first of all, when we find out she's working with James Mason. And then we find out she's working with the government agents and that he outed her. And then, like, as we get these revelations about the people, who they are, as we get the revelation about Van Damme himself and who he is.
He's not Lester Johnson,
I started to question elements of the narrative that we'd already gone through, because I was like, wait, would that character have acted like this if they were really this person? Like, I started to have those kinds of questions. That's why I went and rewatched the film. And I think it mostly holds up in that way. But there's a few questions I have about Eva Marie Saint's character and why she makes certain calls. I'm not entirely sure why she would have sent Thornhill to get killed. I know she's still working with Mason, but she probably wants to keep him alive in some form. Maybe she knows he'll survive. I don't know. There's a lot of questions I have about.
Yeah, she has that high reserve. It's supposed to be an emotional scene, right?
Yeah,
and that's what Hitchcock works more. It's supposed to be effective. You just understand she's sending him to her doom. He can't really say it out loud.
Yeah, there's a lot of bits and pieces of like sending characters to die that I'm not sure that they would have, that you would have wanted to send them to die, or maybe you knew they'd survive. It's the kind of confusion in that realm. I don't take it too seriously on it because the film doesn't take that portion too serious. It's kind of like a who the hell cares of it all. But there were questions I had that I don't know if I had answered on the second viewing. I may have to sit down for a third, but at least I enjoyed the film enough to do that.
I still want to take a train ride. Every time I watch this with my wife, I say I want a Gibson and the brook trout and on a train ride with it. Eventually I want to have it because
you want to see if you'll fit into the overhead.
Olive oil if I can be packed in sardines. Right.
I read an interesting comparison after seeing the film a couple times. There was a writer online who said that we wouldn't have James Bond if we didn't have Roger Thornhill.
I absolutely agree.
Because I know that, of course, James Bond is based on a book series. Before you at me with that, the style of James Bond is very, very reminiscent of.
This is another reason why I wanted to see North by Northwest, because you're a huge James Bond fan.
Yes.
And you probably see elements. This is 1959. James Bond
3 years earlier.
3 years earlier. It's 64. So. Yeah, but this is elements of a very James Bondy espionage, spy taking over the world. And you have what Alfred Hitchcock calls a MacGuffin, the thing that they're after, which we don't really give a crap anymore. Yeah. We don't give a crap. What, you're putting microfilm in an ornament?
Yeah, that was another thing I didn't really know the first time. I couldn't remember what was the whole point of Van Damme's character, but then watching the film the second time, I'm like, oh, that's why he's there. All right. Like, it doesn't bother me at all. But yeah, there's the MacGuffin, there's the over-the-top villains, there's the over-the-top set pieces, action pieces. There isn't really a house on Mount Rushmore, I'm sorry to say. I asked.
But I do. I even though I know it's coming, the big reveal. Oh my God, we're on top of the mountain, and the music starts, doom, boom, 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 and it's got that pacing. It's almost like a heartbeat going as the whole time. Yeah. And they're like, "Where can we go? Climb down? Where are you gonna climb down from?"
Well, what's funny too is that there was two elements that led to the kind of creation of the script, and one was I think there was a journalist that talked to Hitchcock about how he thought like the mistaken identity man, who's mistaken for a non-existent person. would be a really interesting story. And he kind of had that nugget in his head. He also had this idea of an action scene where a guy is hiding inside of Lincoln's nose and sneezes. And he said, wouldn't that make a great title, The Man in Lincoln's Nose?
That's how it started, right?
Yeah, and there's even a documentary about the making of North by Northwest called The Man in Lincoln's Nose. There's a lot of elements to it, and it's the melding of all those pieces that kind of give it that James Bondian feeling. The only difference is that Thornhill doesn't want to be there, and Bond does. You know?
Right, yeah. And also, you're going to defeat the gunplay.
Yep.
Yeah.
But, James Bond wishes that they could have made a film on top of Mount Rushmore, but at that point, it's been done. Now, for me, my first interaction with anything North by Northwest related is probably from one of the most unlikely sources, and that is when they brought the television series Family Guy back from cancellation. The first episode of the new show, of the new, revival of Family Guy, was Peter Griffin finding a copy of The Passion of the Christ 2. Owned by Mel Gibson, who lives on the top of Mount Rushmore. And he goes there to get the microfilm of that movie. And there's the biplane scene is in there. The the Mount Rushmore tackle thing where he gets into the nose and he's talking about how he's a booger and stuff like that. That was my first real interaction with the plot of North by Northwest. And it's where most of my memories of the film came from. So as I'm watching it, I couldn't stop in my head thinking Peter Griffin.
Of course, as a kid, I didn't think Cary Grant did any other movies before this or after.
Well, this is only my second Cary Grant film. After he played an angel. So,
but I love to be the continuity person because you had to have the asbestos. Cause, like Alfred Hitchcock says, he loves the counterpoint, the story. And the counterpoint is when you're out in the farm, what's the counterpoint? Well, you have a businessman from New York City out in nowhere, and it's finally quiet because that's why it's busy in the beginning. It's the converse, the action, people, shots of people going to work. But here you finally get the scene of him out of his element, but he's suit and it's quiet. And it's very interesting how he does that because you think you need to build up the tension, but he just no sound until finally the plane hits the canister. Then you get the sound.
That's fair.
So, quiet. So it always talks about the counterpoint, which I always say, where's the contrast?
And the film has plenty of that in tone and style.
Yes. Even the dresses, the fashion, and everything. But he always wears that one gray suit throughout the whole thing.
Yeah. You got time to change. I have time to take the clothes off, but not, put new ones on.
What a man can do for 50 minutes with his clothes off. How did you get away with that?
I maintain this is the we can't put it on film, but we can talk about it around it. It's the 80s hairband of it all, where they never talk about sex, but they talk about how their messy hair in the morning. Just thinking on the outside, someone who is coming into this film for the first couple times. I only have one real area of the film that I think kind of is a bit of a miss, and it's the portion once he gets to South Dakota, but before the scene on Mount Rushmore. I really like the moment where Eva Marie Saint shoots him and he fakes the death. But there's a couple scenes throughout between that point and the finale that I think get a little exposition dumpy. They get a little...
Oh, the hospital?
Yeah, a little bit I don't care, I guess, what comes out of it. It's just, let's get
I think
to
he
the
knew about the
ending.
hospital that he had to put the woman thing in there.
Yeah, so if we could shave 5 minutes out of this movie, I would shave that 5 minutes, and I think it would make the film infinitely better. That's not to say I didn't like the movie. It's just to say that moment was where I was like, let's get to the ending. We're here. Everything up until that point, brilliant. Squeeze that out.
I agree with that point. There's a little bit of that where you kind of restless in your chair almost.
It might be that I knew where the film was going. I knew it was going to go to Mount Rushmore, and I was like, come on, let's get there. Let's get to the scene. So
I'm going to go back the auction scene. I do like that because, like Alfred Hitchcock said, how do we get him out of there when he's surrounded by the exits? Well, you make an ass out of yourself, of course. You make yourself.
Yeah, that part confused me until I realized what he was doing. Because I thought he was still drunk from the first scene he was in. I was like, what is he doing?
But then, James Mason does that very Alfred Hitchcock thing, I'm sure, of almost like he's choking her.
Yeah.
He's giving her a
kind
massage,
of
but
subtle.
It's subtle. I still in control. Martin Landau plays his, number one, almost Commander Riker to this thing. But Martin Landau said, he very much treated this character like he was gay.
Yep, like he was in love with Mason.
He was loving Mason, and you almost see an homage to it. Yeah.
I could see that. And I kind of thought about it, but again, it's kind of like how this movie is horny without actually being sex. I thought there was kind of the it's the hint of it without ever being allowed to put it in film, because we couldn't say, we couldn't have gay characters in 1959. No, like we could hint at it.
Yeah, you can hint at it, almost like Joe Cairo and Maltese Falcon.
Yeah.
You have to dance around the subject.
Yep.
But I do like the reveal of the gun, and then
it's a great reveal, because I expected Landau to betray him, actually. So I think maybe that was part of the intention, was us to think that maybe there was some like trouble in paradise, if you will.
And that clever of the housekeeper has the gun to Cary Grant to his legs. Oh God, is that?
Yeah, that's one of the. Is it Chekhov's fake gun?
Yeah, because I remember watching the first time watching it, and then like the gunshot, but they say Cary Grant leave. I was like, oh, did he get the gun? Then
See, my mind never went to that until we realized it wasn't the gun, and then I was like, oh, yeah, of course it is. Yeah, of course.
That's the
It
gun.
was just like
Right.
the McGunfin.
But then he does that overhead very much. It's a all about neatness. I do like the exposition about neatness because it explains why when the matches are on the floor, even though he hates neatness, he's still a neatness person. Martin Landau.
Yeah. There's a lot of things
I don't
in
like
the
neatness,
Mount Rushmore
but he's
scene.
still.
And that's why I say, like, cut out the stuff between him getting shot and arriving there, because I think the stuff when you get to Mount Rushmore is so much better than the scenes that came before it. There's all these little moments of brilliance, like Landau's like kind of in love with him, the fake gun, the gun movement, the confusion about where the gun is, the wrestling on top of the freaking, like, when they start rolling, I'm like, where are they rolling? Like, there is no place to roll. And then also the what am I blanking on here with, like, the interaction of him shooting him, Landau being killed, like the whole wrestling of everything is just so pristine and so brilliant. Yeah. The line of dialogue that's my favorite in this movie is a throwaway line while they're hanging off Mount Rushmore, which is, she's like, when he says this is a proposal, and she goes, how'd your first two wives leave you? And he goes, well, they said my life was boring. And it's such a throwaway line, but I thought it was the best line in the whole movie, because it comes out of nowhere and it immediately releases every piece of tension I had and allowed me to just enjoy
even
it.
As they're dangling on life.
Yep.
We're living a dull life. And I do like the scene of, he does get his overhead of, I'm going to solve this by over water. And lifting over that scene. Yes.
Yeah. But that line is so brilliant to me, because most of the time, if you had a modern screenplay on this, he'd have someone like an ex-wife call him at the beginning of the movie and say, the reason I left you is your life is so dull. And when you do it at the beginning of the movie, it wouldn't work for me.
You needed something to
relax.
When
it happens at the end, then you're like, of course.
You need something to relax the atmosphere, even though they're dangling. You need something to relax it. Yeah. And then it's a clever way of having Cary Grant wearing just a white shirt as he's being almost like Rear Window, peering into the lives. It's almost like Rear Window, very voyeuristic.
Yeah, he's kind of again, he's being a secret agent. He's sneaking around
being a secret agent. He's writing and so it's very clever. You have to wear a white shirt as a contrast, the counterpoint, but also you can see him visually.
Yep.
Pops out a little more with the lighting effect, so it's wonderful.
Yep.
Have you seen North by Northwest? My God! Of course, have you seen the opposite, South by Southwest?
Have they ever played North by Northwest at South by Southwest?
I don't know. That's a Google
I
question.
haven't been there.
Yeah.
Let us know your thoughts on the film down below and where it ranks in your Alfred Hitchcock rankings.
You know where it is for me. It's my personal fave.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go then.
Yeah. I'll watch this 3 times.
Down the road, we're going to do a picks with Kyle and Nick, and he's going to pick his second favorite, because now you know his first. So I'm going to have to sneak in a second favorite here. We're going to give you our rankings of some of Alfred Hitchcock's movies in a future episode. But currently, you can check out our picks with Kyle and Nick's episode over on Patreons. Our most recent one we did with favorite David Cronenberg films, and this month we'll also be doing a best of 1997.
There's one actor I wish would have worked with Alfred Hitchcock, and that's Lee Marvin. I think Lee Marvin would have been a perfect fit for Alfred Hitchcock.
Depends on the movie, I think.
Depends on the role. Two strong personalities.
He could have done a James Mason character, maybe, but
Lee Marvin probably show up hammered and you're done.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah.
But it would have been a great movie, yeah.
So let us know your thoughts on the film down below and what you thought about North by Northwest, and maybe your favorite action scene from the film as well. It's filmed with numerous ones, and personally, my favorite action
Mount Rushmore,
scene is
the airplane scene, right?
My favorite thing is not the airplane scene. So
I love everything about the train.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So let us know your thoughts, and make sure while you're down there, please like and subscribe. There are 2 free things that you can do that can help support the channel at the same time as making sure you don't miss future episodes of the show. You can click that little bell icon down there too to get notifications if you'd like to see us every single time we have a new episode. That really does help us out quite a bit. And like I said before, sacrifice a cup of coffee every month, and join that Patreon so that you can help pick some of the different films we'll talk about. There's a lot of Hitchcock movies out there. This is only our second one. And if you want us to cover a third, That's the best way to get it done. Join the Patreon and help us pick down below. Thank you guys for joining us. You can find all my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com under the byline George Kaplan.
You can find my podcast, St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts on the internet. And do I look heavy to you? Text me a note. Think thin.